Okay. Welcome back, everybody. It is currently 9 p.m. Thursday, January 18th, Central Time. Uh, so been a busy weekend of NFL storylines with the Super Wildcard weekend. I'm going to go ahead and start with that. Wanted to podcast out earlier this week. Uh, Never got around to it. So, Super Wildcard weekend recap. I had three big takeaways. I think last week I started with the winners, but this week I am starting with some losers. And I think I had some takeaways. There were three big ones. And that's that I think three teams that lost on Super Wildcard weekend have reached their ceiling with their core or coaching staff. Two in the AFC, one in the NFC. I'll start with the AFC. One is pretty obvious, and it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think that the Steelers are going to win many games, especially in the playoffs, with this current core. Um, I don't. Mason Rudolph isn't going to cut it. Kenny Pickett doesn't look very good. It's only year two. You never know. But he's not physically gifted. In order to, play at a high level at the quarterback position in the NFL. Think of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. All physically gifted. Like, they're not limited physically. Mahomes, big arm. Josh Allen, big arm. Justin Herbert, big arm. Lamar Jackson, big arm. Joe Burrow is the only one that doesn't have a great arm, but Jordan Love, big arm. So you got to be physically gifted, and Kenny Pickett is not. And I think the Steelers, it's time for a pivot. I don't think the Steelers are going to get it done with Tomlin and Pickett. And I mean, who knows with Tomlin? Like, maybe they go out and hire a competent offensive coordinator, which has been their issue for the last few years. There are a million Shanahan guys out there from that coaching tree. Like, go get one of them. Go get an up and comer or something. They have playmakers offensively. Their defense is usually pretty good. It wasn't great this past year, but it's usually good. But I just don't see it happening with this core. It's about time for the Steelers to move on and pivot. Move on from Tomlin, move on from this roster, and just pivot. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, they're just not going to be much of a threat. I mean, a lot of things had to go right this year for the Steelers to win 10 games and make the playoffs. Really think about that. They won, let me pull it up on my laptop here. They won Pittsburgh Steelers. They won 9 games by one possession. Lost two. So they were 9-2 in one possession games. Like, that's pretty remarkable. Usually you don't do that. Usually you're going to be about 500. And with a quarterback like Pickett, although Tomlin, being with a coach like Tomlin, I'll still give you 500, like above 500 there because it's an odd number of games. 6-5 with Tomlin. Maybe you can get to 7. So remove 2 wins. They were an 8-9 team, and that feels about right. That's usually how it works. But they won a lot of one-score games. They, they were outgained in a bunch of games. Their offense was outgained by the opposing team's offense. Defense wasn't great, but they still won 10 games because of that. And it's just not going to get much better than that. So I think it's time to pivot. I don't think the Steelers will. I think the Steelers are, much like some of the more well-run teams in the league, Dallas, who I'll get to in a bit, and Green Bay, and not so much San Francisco, but, Philly doesn't really hesitate to pivot. Maybe New England. Like, they're always willing to be patient. But the Steelers have, I think, reached their ceiling. They haven't won a playoff game in 7 years. It's getting stale, which means it's time for a pivot, in my opinion. The other team in the AFC is the Miami Dolphins. You can tell me all you want how good this offense is. But here's the deal. This offense is built to win in September and October, which is what we saw this year. They were the number one offense in the months of September and October. That's all anyone would talk about, was how great this offense looked. And I kind of shrugged it off. I said, well, let me know when it's December and January and this team has to go, to cold weather. And you saw what happened. Tua's limited. He's limited physically, and he's never played well in the cold. Go look at his numbers in his career. He's never been good in December. He's never been good in January. He might have some good games now and then, but I bet most of them are at home in Miami when there's not bad weather. So Miami has a decision to make. Do they give Tua a contract extension or do they move on? It's easy to sit here and say you move on, but this is an organization that has not had much luck at the quarterback position since Dan Marino. I mean, Tua is probably the best quarterback the Dolphins have had since Dan Marino. And he's not that good. He's just not that good. I don't care what you throw at me with his numbers. What did you watch the game against the Chiefs? He couldn't throw the ball down the field. The one throw he made down the field to Tyreek Hill did all the work. He kind of lofted it up there. Tyreek Hill jumped up and caught it while the other two defenders were kind of down on the ground, and he just outran them and ran for a touchdown. It was all Tyreek. Like Tua just kind of threw it up. His final numbers weren't good, but if you remove that play, they're much worse. So Tua finished 20 of 39, not good. 100 yards, not good. And Tyreek Hill, his longest catch was 53 yards. I assume it was that touchdown. So 53, 199 minus 53 is 146. Divide that by 38 attempts. That's 3.8 yards per attempt. That's terrible. That's terrible. And I know it was, one of the historically coldest games in the NFL. Matter. Patrick Mahomes looked fine. And you can say all you want how he's the best quarterback in the league. But Mahomes isn't, I just said it, Mahomes isn't limited physically. He's got a big arm. He can make plays out of the pocket. You know who can't? Tua. You know who can't make all the throws? Tua. You know whose arm isn't great? Tua. You know who's not good in cold weather? Tua. And I'm to the point with Miami that, like Pittsburgh, it's time to pivot. It's time to switch it up. You're not going to be any better than what you were this year. If you do end up being better than you were this year, I'll be shocked. Another thing with Miami is they had a substantial lead in the AFC East. I believe at one point they were 7-3, 8-3, and ended up 11-6, I believe, and lost the division title to Buffalo. There's no reason for that. Like, that's terrible. Buffalo was 6-6 at one point. You were in the driver's seat. You had home field advantage for a week or two in December. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe that was just projections, based on my projections. But this is the best it's going to be with Miami. I can almost guarantee that. And now they have decisions to make. Do they move on from Tua? And if they don't, do they give him a big contract, which you would in that situation? Then cuts to the roster. Who do you get rid of? Because you're not going to be able to keep everybody. Then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this team's worse. Why are we worse? Because we gave Tua a big contract, and now we can't be any better than 8-9 and 9-8, which is where they're heading for if they do this. So I think it's time for Miami to pivot. I would strip it down. I would strip down both the Dolphins and the Steelers and get a quarterback who's not physically limited for both. And Miami, you can argue with me all you want about how Miami is, one of the top teams in the AFC. Well, here's the reason why they're not going to win an AFC championship anytime soon. The AFC goes through Baltimore, cold weather, Buffalo, cold weather, Cincinnati, cold weather, Kansas City, cold weather. The only two outliers in the AFC are LA, Herbert, and Houston, Stroud, who I think all with Miami, if they keep going in this direction, they will be in the mix, but they have reached their ceiling this year. All what? Eight of those teams, seven or eight of those teams are going to be vying for the AFC Championship in a given year. Four of them are in cold weather. I would even throw Pittsburgh in there, even though I just said I would pivot, but Pittsburgh historically always competitive. They're always going to be in the playoff mix, even in a down year like this year. And guess what? Cold weather. So I wouldn't count out Cleveland either. Also cold weather. So all of the teams in the AFC are cold weather teams. That's why Miami's never going to win. If I'm wrong one day, I'll come on this podcast and proclaim how I was wrong. But I'm not going to be. The other team is the Dallas Cowboys. I don't know what the hell happened against Green Bay. That was not the team I expected to show up. I'll admit I bought into the Dallas hype. I thought this team was different. They seemed different. I thought like the NFC went through Dallas and San Francisco. It felt like those teams were on a collision course in the NFC. I didn't really buy as much as I love Green Bay. Youngest team in the NFL, you just don't see that. You just don't see a team like Green Bay going on a run. You don't see a team like the Rams, who have overperformed this year, go on a run. You know, the Rams have two good players. I mean, they have a couple more, but for the most part, they have two good players, Stafford and Donald. Puka Nacua looks really good, but it's just year one for him. I need a larger body of work. But they really only have two players. Although they're definitely heading in the right direction, and they have a really nice young core. But like Green Bay, they're young. Their cap is tied up into two players. And they made the playoffs. Detroit, very competitive. But they're I guess it's the fact that they're the Lions, historic losing organization. No offense, Lions. I'm cheering for you. Except if Green Bay plays you. Um, but historically bad. They have some holes on the defensive side of the ball. Jared Goff's their quarterback who doesn't play well away from home or who doesn't play well outdoors. And, Dallas is indoors, but San Francisco is not. So I'd never really bought Detroit. And then Tampa, we'll see. I have some nice things to say about Tampa here in a bit. And then Philly heading in the wrong direction as the season ended. So I thought the NFC was down to two teams, and Dallas ends up losing in Super Wildcard Weekend to Green Bay in a game that was not close really from the start. Green Bay dominated them from start to finish. Don't be fooled by the final score. Don't be fooled by Dak Prescott's numbers. It was not a good performance from him. It was not a good performance from Dallas's offense, which is the number one scoring offense in the league heading into the game. Which brings me to my point is I think this year, these last 3 years, are about what Dallas is going to do with its current core. However, I'm not yet ready to move on, and say strip it all down like I am with Miami and Pittsburgh. And that's why Jerry Jones is keeping Mike McCarthy around. I get it. I'm just not convinced it's going to work. You've had 3 years of this. Usually 3 years is a trend. And unlike having a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers or Matthew Stafford, who have been in the NFC the last couple of years, you have Dak Prescott. And I like Dak. I really do. But he's physically limited. Are you sensing a trend here with these teams that I have circled? Dak is physically limited. He doesn't have a great arm. I mean, it was clear in that game Sunday who was the better quarterback, and it wasn't Dak Prescott. I considered Dak Prescott to be a top 10 quarterback, and I watched that game and I was like, I don't know. Jordan Love, I thought was a fringe top 10 quarterback heading into the postseason, and that game just was not close as to who was the better quarterback. It was Jordan Love. And now I'm like, man, Jordan Love's probably safely in my top 10 quarterbacks. Dak is probably on the outside looking in. And who knows what some of these other younger quarterbacks are going to be like. We still haven't seen much from Anthony Richardson, who I'm very high on. Jalen Hurts had a down year, but I'm not ready to give up on him. So Dallas, I just think this is what you're going to be. Unfortunately, I understand wanting to run this back another year, especially with the NFC being as weak as it is. San Francisco is really good, but Brock Purdy's their quarterback, and Brock Purdy's a good player. I don't buy into this that he's overrated. He's a good player, but is he a top 10 quarterback? No, he's physically limited. Would I have him or Dak? I honestly don't know. I'd probably rather have Purdy because this is 3 years in a row where Dak has fumbled in the postseason, and it's unfortunate. I like Dak. I like Mike McCarthy. I love Mike McCarthy. I will defend Mike McCarthy every single day. He's a good coach, but his offense is stale. It's not very innovative defensively. I think Dan Quinn got exposed, and I don't think he's an idiot, but he got exposed. So I don't know where Dallas goes from here. You're just not going to get much better with Dak Prescott as your quarterback. But at the same time, you're not going to not have a chance to win the NFC. But the pieces have to be perfect, and that's a tall ask for a team that's pretty much consistently drafting in the 20s. You're not going to have a perfect team. San Francisco is the best team in the NFC. They're not perfect. Baltimore is the best team in the AFC. They're not perfect. You're probably going to have a perfect team. And it's hard to move on from these guys, who are good quarterbacks like Tua and Dak. Not so much Kenny Pickett, but it's hard to move on from these guys because the argument is, how are you going to do any better? It's a fair argument. But I thought John Middlecoff made a great point on his podcast this week. Sometimes in life, you just got to have balls. And you have to make big decisions. You got to take big swings. You know who had balls? Bill Belichick to move on from Drew Bledsoe for Tom Brady. Drew Bledsoe was a good player. He was a great quarterback. Tom Brady was better. Maybe not at the moment he made that decision, but based on projections, he knew. You know who's been, you know who's had balls for the last 30 years? The Green Bay Packers. And not just from Favre to Rodgers to Love, even from Majkowski, who was the quarterback before Favre. Decent player for his time. Pretty good player for his time. Late 80s, early 90s. You look at his numbers, you wouldn't be impressed. But he had made a Pro Bowl, maybe an All-Pro one year. He was a decent player. And he was the guy. And Ron Wolf came in and made the trade for Favre, and Favre came in relief for Majkowski. They told Majkowski to beat it. Favre was their guy. And then 15 years later, they said, Favre, beat it. Rodgers is our guy. 15 years later, or however long, they told Rodgers to beat it. Love's our guy. And they've been 4 for 4. No, well, 3 for 3, technically. So sometimes in life, you just got to have balls, as John Middlecoff says. Yeah, like, it might work. It might not work. But it also might work. And Jerry Jones isn't terrible in the player personnel department. I wish he'd be more hands-off as an owner, but I can't fault him as a player personnel guy. They're always pretty good in player personnel. They always draft and develop pretty well. I can't say the same for Miami, but Jerry's issue is that he loves his players too much and he overpays them. That's why Dallas never has much money to spend in free agency. But they draft well. But anyway, that's my take. Those 3 teams, I just don't see them getting any better than what we've seen this year. I've spent too long talking about it already. 18 minutes. So let me move on here. Let me start with the Texans-Browns game. I think the final score was 45-14. I didn't type the 14 in my notes. Houston's just heading in the right direction, man. I think I said it last week. Talk about an organization that completely flipped the script in one offseason. It's amazing. Like, a rebuild in the NFL really, if it's done right, shouldn't take that long. Today's game is driven by quarterbacks and head coaches. If you look at the final standings in a division, the team with the best quarterback head coach combination almost always wins. There are obviously some exceptions to that, but AFC East, McDermott, Allen, that's the best quarterback head coach combination. That's the reason why they won the division. AFC West, Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, best head coach quarterback combination in the division and the league. That's why they won the division. And, you know, AFC North, you could argue Harbaugh, Lamar, best combination. That's why they won the division. Now, the NFC is a little bit different. Dallas is good, has a good head coach quarterback combination. Green Bay, I think, has the best head coach quarterback combination in its division, but for half the season, they didn't have that. That's why Detroit won the division. But Houston, it's amazing how quickly this can happen. And it makes you wonder why teams take so long to rebuild. Football is not basketball where there are only 2 or 3 generational talents in a not even generational talents, but talented players that can lead your be franchise players for your team. It's not that way in the NFL. The NFL, there are of the 200 some picks in the NFL, probably